I'm from a team based in London, in Britain, and unfortunately my colleagues can't actually make it. Christopher Winch and Melahat Sahin-Dikmen, but we've carried out this. We've done the European bit of this project. And so we've been trying to give a European dimension to the whole problem of embedding climate literacy into the building trades. And I just wanted to concentrate today on the different approaches, because obviously, thank you very much, that looks great. Obviously, there's very different approaches across Europe. If you can, well, those, I'll just show what on this slide, the top two photos are really from an Italian training center in outside Rome. So, and they've been really training for low energy construction for quite a long time now. So I guess we all use different terminologies. We've often talked about low energy construction, but the European speak is about NZEB, nearly zero energy building, which encompasses airtight building envelopes, thermal bridge construction, on-site renewable energy, etc. And there's been quite a number of EU programs and targets set over the years now. Build Up Skills was a big program that began in 2010 and covered 30 European countries, really looking at how equipped the vocational education systems were in each country to developing NZEB, or embedding NZEB into the different curricula. And then, of course, we have what's been guiding this is the European Performance in Building Directive, which aims to reduce carbon emissions by 55%. Across Europe, 40% is attributable to the built environment of end-use carbon emissions. And then we have what was initially came out in 2019 was the European Green Deal. So in terms of what particularly the Build Up Skills program recognized was what was really required for NZEB was a holistic approach to vocational education and training, looking at buildings as a single thermal unit. This is what John's already emphasized really also. What was also important was social interaction between occupations, the need for team working, and so communication is quite an important aspect. And broader and deeper knowledge and skills and competencies to be embedded into the vocational education program. Plus climate literacy and greater equality and worker agency in the construction process. So what we've identified was a very diverse range of approaches, ranging from long-term mainstreaming of different elements of low energy construction into the curriculum to just the reliance on short courses and add-on modules. Can I have the next slide? So just to say something about what we've been doing, we of course couldn't focus on every country, but we particularly looked at Belgium, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Ireland, and UK. And even in these countries, we can identify three rather clear different approaches to vocational education. And then we relied on desk research and different and then we had site visits to, I think, all those countries. Research participants included union representatives, education providers, and representatives of employer associations. But I think what guided us particularly was what we call a transparency tool, which we developed in our research as a checklist for curriculum design for low energy construction, and had a range of choices. But I won't go into that now. Can I have the next slide? So to talk about these different approaches, Denmark represents one approach, which is clearly identifiable in Europe, which is a social partner-based approach. So I guess in the sense that the unions play rather an important role in this, it has similarities with the Canadian system. It's jointly governed by the vocational education is jointly governed by the social partners. And of course, in Denmark, we have very high levels of unionization. In construction, about 67% are unionized. And they have a very comprehensive vocational education system, for instance, for usually between 3 and 3.5 years, and longer for occupations like electricians. And the system is, in the sense that it's similar to the German, in that it's a dual system, alternating between the school and workplace learning. And they have an advisory board for education and training, which sets competency outcomes. But energy efficiency in Denmark probably the most in Europe, has been long embedded into the system, plus green modules. You see here, these pictures are examples of them from an insulation training centre we visited. And there's been union campaigns, especially for the electricians, to promote active engagement with climate change and enhancing climate. Next slide. Now it's a rather different system in many respects. It's a Swedish system, which we would call a school-based system. So as opposed to a social partner-based system, it's a school-based system, which because in 1938, it was regulated that vocational education should come under the government rather than be based with employers or social partners. So in that sense, it comes under the education National Agency for Education, which has overall responsibility. And though the social partners do advise, and of course, as in Denmark, the unionization rate is very high, 68%. But it's quite a long and comprehensive vocational education system for building construction, 3 years in school with different work placements, combining general, secondary and vocational training, and followed by 1 to 2 years as apprenticeship. So altogether about 5 years. And climate change is clearly embedded into those studies. It's addressed as part of social studies. So guidelines, just to give you an example, that the student should develop knowledge of what sustainable development means in the industry. Now, another rather different example of a school-based system is the Belgium system, which is also very reliant on government support. Although again, the unionization rate in construction is relatively high in Belgium, 50%. And the social partners are involved, particularly through the organisation Constructive, which is responsible for vocational education in the industry. And they design occupational profiles and curricula for both initial and continuing vocational education. In the pictures you can see, these are from a training centre in Belgium, showing, they have mock houses, which is so you can begin to understand air tightness, and also, of course, equipment, including heat pumps. So it's what is called a school-based system, but they do emphasize strongly, which I think is particularly important, the occupational overlaps between different construction trades, so that there's a good possibility to coordinate and to establish team working. And in attitudes are seen as very important in the workplace. So there's a kind of comprehensive coverage within this system, NZ techniques, but no material as yet on climate literacy. So not as advanced in many respects, particularly Denmark. Can I have the next slide? And now the German system, which always gets a lot of attention. Unfortunately, in Germany, what has, I think, been a big problem in recent years is that the unionization rate has significantly declined. In fact, the overall German unionization rate is actually less than in Britain, unbelievably. But the governance of vocational education is still through social partnership, despite this. And vocational education has a step system. So in the sense that the trainees start from looking at almost every area of construction, and then they gradually specialize over the 3-year period. and the curricula is regularly updated by the partners. They have project-based training, which is extremely effective. And it's all supported by textbooks featuring NZEB and climate literacy. So in many respects, the German system is most successful at embedding climate literacy into the different occupational VT systems. And workplace competence is very broadly conceived, and there is also the aim that workers, once trained, are able to carry out projects themselves rather than being constantly supervised, as unlike the British system. So if you it illustrates what I'm saying, it's if you could put up the next slide, it's from a textbook, which is an example of how climate change is embedded in this particular occupation, plastering. So the next slide, please. Not going on too long. This is again a rather different system, the Irish vocational education system for low energy construction, which is, like the British system, a market-based system, perhaps unlike the British system, has much more support from government. And vocational education policy is led by the government, by the Department of Education. With social partner input, although the unionisation rate is relatively low at 26% for construction. And NZ training is carried out for the current workforce from an EU-funded pilot, which was carried out for the build-up under the Build Up Skills Initiative, and it has now been rolled out very successfully. So the idea was to upskill, first of all, the existing workforce, and then roll this out into the initial vocational education. So there's detailed course specifications for each trade, which sets out knowledge and understanding, skills, know-how, personal and social competencies involved in nearly zero energy building, and an introduction which makes a brief but rather direct reference to climate change, with courses designed as an introduction, combining theory with demonstration. This is the pictures are from a training centre in. They've set up retrofit and nearly NZEB training centres in Waterford and Wexford, and these are from the training centres and mock housing, and again to illustrate what can be done. Next slide. So to just say something about the UK vet for let developments. Again, this is again a much more market-based system. Although there's been quite a bit of attention to developing training for retrofit coordinators and assessors, involving cross-occupational awareness and an upgrading of building service occupations. So a lot of attention to the building services, particularly electricians, and also to insulation, to developing standards for insulation, and quite a number of initiatives, which is probably stands out in the European context in relation to women in construction and bringing women in, and really seeing that the one way to successfully meet NZEB targets is to have a much more inclusive workforce. But the barriers to embedding climate literacy are quite significant in Britain, including geographical differences, funding, employer disinterest, really. Next slide. So what are the challenges if we look across Europe? One is the large number of micro businesses, which makes mobilization of resources for vet-for-let programs, and in particular the work-based elements of vocational education, extremely difficult. And often a failure to involve key stakeholders, in particular the unions, and England is exemplary in that respect. A failure to be inclusive, especially opening up to women. A significant unregulated activity, and under or unqualified segments of the workforce, hindering effective work-based learning, structural issues, communication difficulties, lingual working environments, etc., age profiles, and narrow skill profiles, recruitment profiles. But above all, I mean, I think this is complained about all over Europe. Very, very significant skill shortages. So the next slide, coming on to now, which is that what is really needed is stakeholder alliances. Can I have the next slide, the final one? Thanks. And state involvement, and I think this is evident in Belgium, Denmark, and Germany. The importance of team working, direct employment, and regulation of the subcontract chain to ensure effective workplace learning, good employment and working conditions in order to overcome the gap that John referred to and occupational interfaces. The importance of including all excluded groups, including migrants. And I should say the Danish system is really trying to incorporate migrants into the vocational education training system, women and Black and Asian minority ethnic groups, and the importance of stakeholder alliances, including the unions, local authorities, but I think above all, what is desperately needed is a transformation of the construction industry into a green, inclusive industry that values labour. So that's my bit. Thank you.